The chamber pulsed with quiet diplomacy. Centuries of peace had dulled the edges of war, and even the thought of conflict felt alien. Representatives of hundreds of species gathered inside the great council spire orbiting the dying star Virelis. They spoke in calm tones, exchanged meaningless ceremonial pleasantries, and wore the smug confidence of civilizations that believed themselves above violence. After all, there hadn't been a war in 2,500 years. The Treaty of Kelvin had held longer than most stars. And then, a human stood. The council hushed. Humans rarely spoke. They listened, observed, and voted only when absolutely necessary. Their quiet was often taken as deference. Or irrelevance. But today, the human representative, gray-suited, still-faced, stood without preamble and said, "We hereby declare war." The stillness was instant and suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. After a beat, the silence exploded. Alien delegates jumped to their feet, voices clashing in 10 languages. Translation orbs failed to keep up. Confusion morphed into outrage. The head of the Dorash Confederacy bellowed, "On whom? For what?" While the translucent Klyresh hissed, "This is madness. Humanity seeks attention, not battle." Others laughed nervously, awaiting some kind of explanation, a miscommunication, a political ploy, a bluff. The human didn't flinch. "We have submitted 231 formal protests over the last 27 years regarding the obliteration of our colony in Sector 12 Kappa by the Varnak Dominion. Each was dismissed, shelved, or ignored. The final signal from that colony contained screams. We will not scream again." The Varnak ambassador shifted uncomfortably. "This is ancient history," he snapped. "It was a minor border skirmish. Mistakes happen." The human turned toward him slowly. "You didn't mistake them for soldiers. You incinerated civilians. Children. No verified footage exists." The Varnak replied, less confident now. "There wasn't," the human said flatly. "So we retrieved it." A small orb rose from the human's wristband and projected a grainy, time-stamped recording into the air. The chamber watched in growing horror as the footage played. A domed settlement under a red sky, mushrooming fire from orbit, humans running, burning. A child crying into a camera. "We called for help. Why aren't you coming?" The projection ended. Dead silence followed. Even the breathing of oxygen-based delegates seemed subdued. For a moment, no one moved. Then the voice of the Varnak ambassador broke the stillness again, low, defensive, dripping with false bravado. "This is ancient. The Varnak no longer operate under that military. That command structure is obsolete. You're choosing war over the past." The human nodded slowly. "Yes. Because the past was never buried, only ignored. And your excuses do not erase the bones beneath our soil." A soft murmur passed through the chamber. Delegates from minor systems began messaging their homeworlds in quiet panic. The lead facilitator of the council, a slow-spoken member of the Glensari Unity, addressed the human representative with evident unease. "Humanity is one of the few species who remembers what galactic war truly meant. You've studied it, feared it. Why now? Why choose to reignite the horrors?" The reply came instantly. "Because we didn't choose this. We pleaded. We filed requests, demanded investigations, submitted data, appealed to your codes of justice. Your council weighed the cost of truth and found our dead too inconvenient to acknowledge. We spent 27 years watching you laugh and trade and mock us for our persistence. You chose silence. We will speak now." No theatrics. No raised voice. Just a tone so measured it chilled the blood. Across the chamber, delegates began reevaluating their perception of humanity. For centuries, they'd considered humans quaint, fragile, too sentimental to be taken seriously. Their technology was excellent but rarely used in offense. Their fleets were advanced but modest. Their culture rich but guarded. They'd never once declared war. Until now. One of the Insectoid delegates clicked in alarm. "This violates the Treaty of Kelvin. You break 2.5 millennia of peace." Do you understand what that means? The human nodded. We understand perfectly. It means we believed peace had meaning. But it was conditional. Fragile. Hypocritical. Now we discard its illusion. Another voice, someone from the AM3 delegation, whispered. You'll start a spiral. This could collapse the whole council. The humans stared directly at her. Then let it collapse. If peace only lasts as long as silence does, then it isn't peace. It's submission. With that, the human retrieved the projection orb, turned, and walked away. No threats. No final warnings. Just the weight of a decision that had already been made. Behind him, the chamber sat stunned, drowning in its own silence. In that moment, a truth dawned across the species of the galaxy. Not all wars begin with anger. Some begin with mourning. Others, with resolve. But the most dangerous ones begin when the quietest voice finally decides to speak. The declaration stunned the galaxy, but it was the evidence that followed which shook its foundations. Humanity didn't rely on emotion. They came with data, dates, coordinates, audio, and footage, compiled over decades, ignored by the Council every time. What had been dismissed as a border miscommunication was revealed as a deliberate eradication of a civilian settlement. The Varnak hadn't attacked by accident. They had targeted life support systems, communications, and escape vessels. It was extermination by design. The humans released a timeline. Year 2473, colony permits granted for a terraformable world in neutral space. Year 2478, settlement operational with 12,000 residents, mostly families, researchers, and agricultural workers. Year 2481, first signs of tension, as Varnak warships began patrolling nearby routes. Year 2484, colony stops transmitting. Year 2485, last recovered data retrieved from a relay satellite drifting on low power, showing orbital bombardment patterns matching Varnak weapons signatures. Year 2486 to 2513, 231 formal appeals filed to the Galactic Council, including 9 to the Varnak Dominion directly. 0 responses. 0 action. The silence was deliberate. The footage that followed broke whatever illusions remained. No dramatics, no edits, just raw feeds. People screaming as domes shattered. Children begging for help on emergency channels. Medical bays overflowing. Then the voices ceased, one by one, as power failed. Static replaced pleas. The last image, a young boy clutching a scorched toy, looking upward, eyes wide with a terror the Council never dared to acknowledge. The Varnak were given an opportunity to respond. Their ambassador stammered out an explanation about rogue commanders and unofficial actions beyond government authorization. But internal records provided by human intelligence contradicted every word. The attack had been sanctioned, discussed, and archived. The Varnak had logged the destruction as resource denial, and labeled the human settlers as non-affiliated biological elements. Humanity had been erased on paper before the missiles were even launched. The Council's complicity ran deeper than simple negligence. Memos surfaced showing that several species warned of retaliation if a full investigation disrupted Varnak trade routes. Economic interests had been placed above justice. Delegates had voted to table every motion with procedural delays until they were forgotten. The system hadn't failed, it had worked exactly as designed, to avoid discomfort, to maintain convenience, to keep the balance undisturbed. For humanity, that balance was already broken. They hadn't retaliated immediately because they believed in the rules. They'd honored the treaties. For years, they endured the whispers. Humans are soft, too bureaucratic, they won't act. The silence of Earth wasn't weakness, it was patience. Not because they couldn't respond, but because they chose not to, hoping that those who claimed to value peace would prove it. Instead, they'd watched as their dead were buried under trade routes and diplomatic formalities. Now they no longer asked for justice. They would take it. The galaxy reeled. Some species condemned the Varnak, desperately trying to distance themselves. Others begged humanity to reconsider. But every plea was answered with the same words. You had your chance. Even neutral systems began to question their assumptions. If humans could be pushed to war, what did that say about the depths of what had been done? Why had the Varnak been so certain there'd be no response? How many other crimes had been quietly buried? Within hours, Varnak-controlled regions saw panic erupt. Civilian channels were flooded with evacuation orders. Military assets vanished from public grids. Pirate factions disappeared. Even black market arms dealers refused contracts involving humans. A fear took root, not of revenge, but of precision. Humanity didn't lash out. They prepared. The council met in emergency session, but the damage was irreversible. Trust in the institution collapsed. Delegates resigned. Protests erupted across peaceful planets. The idea that one of the council's founding members had knowingly ignored a genocide shattered the fragile unity that had been worshipped for generations. The weight of it all came crashing down in one broadcast, a single statement released by Earth's unified assembly. We grieve what we lost. We grieve the silence that followed. But we grieve no longer. We act. No declarations. No ultimatums. Just the truth, spoken without performance. Across star systems, people who once mocked humans now feared the clarity in their voice. Not the fury of vengeance, but the calm of purpose. Because there's a silence more terrifying than rage, the silence of a people who have counted the cost and decided to pay it in full. The peace had already died. Humanity was merely the first to bury it. The first blow wasn't a weapon. It was silence. Entire Varnak communication hubs went dark. Starlink relays collapsed in sequence, not through brute force but through precision malware that bypassed every known firewall. No alarms. No explosions. Just blackouts. Supply fleets floated blind. Military orders never arrived. Command channels looped endlessly with old data. Humanity never announced their offensive. They didn't need to. They let absence speak. The Varnak home system watched in disbelief as their orbital defense satellites stopped tracking. A single message appeared on every dormant screen, written in perfect Varnak dialect, asterisk. This is not vengeance. This is correction. Asterisk. Strategic nodes vanished. Refueling stations evaporated in synchronized microfission bursts. Not a single civilian was harmed. No cities were touched. But every shipyard, weapons facility, and AI command lattice fell. Within 72 hours, the Dominion lost 47% of its infrastructure without a single human ship crossing their border. What followed wasn't conventional war. It was calculated dismantling. Varnak admirals scrambled for action, but nothing worked. Battle groups issued countermeasures, only to find their targeting systems endlessly rebooting. Human code had embedded itself months earlier, undetected, waiting. When Varnak ships attempted to lock targets, their weapons systems displayed a single line, asterisk. Not yet. Asterisk. Panic turned inward. Generals accused each other of sabotage. Fleets retreated from border systems, not knowing which outposts were compromised. Command chains fractured. Civil unrest followed. Entire colonies questioned their leaders. They had believed humans were docile, slow to act. No one had anticipated this kind of war. There were no invasions, no declarations of territory. Instead, humanity weaponized understanding. They'd studied the Dominion for decades, not just militarily, but culturally. They knew which colonies were symbolic, which nodes were sacred, which traditions couldn't be broken. Those were the ones they targeted, not to destroy, but to remove carefully. Entire religious archives disappeared without trace, replaced with holologs of the dead colony's children speaking in perfect Varnak. The message was clear, asterisk, this is what you erased. Now remember it, asterisk. For the first time in centuries, Varnak leadership sought negotiation. They sent transmissions to Earth. No reply. They contacted neutral intermediaries. No reply. Human silence became a strategy more effective than weapons. Without engagement, the Varnak couldn't even claim moral high ground. They were being disassembled by an enemy who hadn't fired a single traditional shot. When the first human fleet appeared, it wasn't to attack. It was to surround. Dozens of coordinated armadas emerged near critical Varnak systems, forming containment webs. Not one crossed planetary orbit. Instead, they activated blockade fields, new technology that created quantum interdiction bubbles, sealing off escape or reinforcement. Varnak warships rushed to intercept, only to discover their propulsion systems destabilizing in proximity. Not destruction, neutralization. One Varnak captain, desperate, initiated a suicide charge toward a blockade line. As his ship passed the perimeter, it froze in midspace. External feeds showed every light flicker out. The crew vanished. Not killed, extracted. Within moments, the vessel drifted empty, airlocks open. A human probe emerged, tagged the hull, and moved on. Each action drove one truth deeper. Humans weren't retaliating. They were proving a point. Systems began surrendering preemptively. Governors offered resources, access codes, even hostages. The reply was always the same, asterisk. We don't want your terms. We want your silence. Asterisk, and then the systems would be severed from Dominion control, not annexed, not conquered, just removed. Infrastructure rewritten, governance collapsed, all without a single boot landing. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't fleet size or firepower. It was their restraint, sharpened into precision. They didn't escalate emotionally. They didn't seek glory. They struck exactly where meaning lived. Inside the Galactic Council, fear escalated. Delegates argued whether this was justice or overreach. But no one dared move against the humans. They'd seen what happened to those who did nothing. Worse, they saw what happened to those who tried to apologize too late. Whispers replaced arrogance. Former critics now quoted Earth's military philosophers. Strategists rushed to adapt their defenses, not against ships, but against ideology, against the slow certainty of retribution that couldn't be bartered with. Even Varnak citizens began to shift. Propaganda collapsed under human-fed truths, archives of council transcripts, audio from suppressed hearings, recordings of delegates mocking the lost colony. These weren't forged. They were authenticated, undeniable. Entire districts revolted not because of human force, but because of the shame they could no longer avoid. This wasn't conquest. It was exposure. A mirror held to the face of a civilization that had convinced itself it would never pay for its sins. And in that reflection they saw the end, not of their world, but of their certainty. The council gathered again, but the room was different. Confidence had drained from its marble floors and echoing halls. Delegates spoke in hushed tones, watching the door as if waiting for judgment. The human representative didn't arrive in person. A projection appeared instead, unblinking, silent until addressed. A trembling facilitator initiated contact. Humanity, he began, voice wavering. This situation has escalated far beyond precedent. You've dismantled a sovereign power without formal engagement. What do you want? The hologram replied instantly. Accountability. Starting with the dissolution of the Varnak Dominion and a public admission from this council for 27 years of obstruction and silence. Several delegates protested. That's unreasonable. You can't dictate interstellar governance. You're threatening the balance. The human's eyes remained fixed. The balance you speak of was built on the bones of children. We are not negotiating opinion. We are enforcing reality. One of the more senior council members, a seasoned diplomat from a peacekeeping species, attempted logic. Surely you understand that if every species retaliated this way, chaos would follow. You're setting a precedent that erodes. It was already eroded. The human interrupted. You just buried the evidence beneath procedure. The facilitator tried again. You're still outnumbered. There are hundreds of us. Billions of soldiers. You can't fight the entire council. We aren't fighting you, the human said calmly. We're exposing you. You want to measure strength in numbers. We measure it in resolve. You count fleets. We count the weight of memory. Yours is hollow. Ours has names. A silence fell heavier than before. Behind the council facade, panic spread. Intelligence reports confirmed that human influence had reached beyond the Dominion. Dozens of minor powers had begun adopting Earth's digital architecture. Civil systems were being reprogrammed using open-source human frameworks. Cultural broadcasts, documentaries, court transcripts, even music from the lost colony, circulated in places where Earth had never set foot. It wasn't war. It was a shift. Quiet, precise, irreversible. The Varnak delegation, broken and isolated, attempted a last-minute offer. We'll issue a formal apology. We'll pay reparations. We'll withdraw all border claims. The human replied coldly. You'll do all that. But not as a sovereign empire. As defendants. Confusion spread. Defendants? Every surviving high official of the Dominion will stand trial. Not in your courts. In ours. No immunity. No witness suppression. Every record opened. Every lie stripped. One Varnak general roared in protest. You have no jurisdiction. The reply came sharp. We have graves. That's jurisdiction enough. The council spiraled. Half the chamber erupted into procedural protests. The other half stared in grim silence, unable to deny the clarity of what was unfolding. A few began to see the future. This wasn't about war anymore. It was about transformation. A minor delegate from a peripheral world dared to speak. If we comply, what comes next? Do we all submit to human authority? The hologram paused. You confuse justice with dominance. We aren't asking for allegiance. We're asking for honesty. If that threatens you, then perhaps you've hidden more than we know. Whispers swept the room. Fear, not of conquest, but exposure. Then came the final line. You had your chance to choose peace. Not absence of war, actual peace, where truth mattered. You chose convenience. You chose silence. Now we choose what comes next. And with that, the projection vanished. No threats. No timeline. Just departure. The council remained frozen. Across the galaxy, pressure mounted. Varnak colonies crumbled from within. Human fleets didn't occupy. They stood at distance, watching. Entire systems flipped allegiance not through force but through exhaustion. They were done believing in the council. They saw who acted when no one else would. For the first time in 2.5 millennia, the concept of centralized authority wavered. Humanity didn't demand power. They demanded honesty. They didn't conquer. They revealed. It became clear, they weren't trying to lead the galaxy. They were dragging it back to conscience. And in the shadows of a crumbling order, the galaxy had to choose, rebuild on truth or fall under its own silence. The blockade tightened but never crushed. No civilian starport was fired upon. No agricultural world suffered disruption. Humanity had no interest in dominance through fear. Their victory was not measured in worlds taken, but in truths forced into light. The Varnak homeworld, once proud and untouchable, found itself ringed by human fleets, silent, cold, watching. Inside every orbital corridor, broadcasts played without interruption. Varnak citizens were shown their own classified war logs, decrypted council transcripts, internal memos. Footage of the lost colony's final days repeated on every frequency. Each child's face, every scream ignored, was shown without censorship. There were no accusations, only documentation. Humanity offered no narrative, just proof. The pressure broke from within. Varnak civilians flooded government buildings. Statues of wartime leaders were torn down. Military personnel deserted. With their own population turning, Varnak High Command issued a full capitulation. No terms, no bargaining. Surrender, unconditional. Humanity responded immediately. War ceased. Fleets held position. Not a single retaliatory strike followed. Instead, tribunals began. Mobile courtships arrived in neutral orbits, staffed by multilingual legal AI, human jurists, and observers from uninvolved species. Every trial was public. Every testimony recorded. No theatrics, no propaganda. Just a methodical, forensic unpacking of what had been done, by whom, and why it was allowed to happen. Generals stood trial. Administrators confessed under evidence that couldn't be denied. Council members who had buried reports were summoned as witnesses. Some were tried too. Excuses collapsed when faced with dates and names. The cost of silence became undeniable. The galaxy watched. What they saw wasn't vengeance, it was discipline. Humanity didn't torture. They didn't humiliate. They didn't celebrate. Every sentence was passed with clinical exactness. Life imprisonment. Disarmament. Financial redistribution to surviving families. Cultural embargoes lifted only under verified internal reforms. Where old empires might have erased their enemies, humans made them face themselves. And yet, nothing shocked the galaxy more than what came next. Humanity withdrew. Once the trials ended, the fleets left orbit. No puppet governments were installed. No colonies annexed. No resources seized. The systems were left intact, free, and hollowed by the weight of consequence. The Galactic Council attempted to recover authority, but its voice no longer held weight. Too many had watched it stall and spin when justice cried out. Entire member species held referendums to exit. Delegates resigned en masse. The Council fractured, not from external attack, but from within. The foundation had always been weak. It had only taken one honest storm to show the cracks. In the absence of centralized power, the galaxy feared chaos. But it didn't come. Humanity didn't assume command. They didn't install themselves as rulers. Instead, they proposed a tribunal framework independent of any single species. Judges elected from rotating worlds. Oversight protocols. Transparency by design, not by promise. Not control, structure. The proposal passed, not because it was forced, but because it made sense. Humanity never positioned themselves as saviors. They simply refused to let horror go unanswered. In one of the final broadcasts before Earth went silent again, a human speaker addressed a mixed audience of young alien cadets. We were told the galaxy had moved beyond war. We believed it. But when peace is used to hide blood, it's no longer peace, it's performance. We broke 2,500 years of stillness not to take, but to remind. Silence is not the same as justice. And forgetting is not healing. One cadet raised a hand. Why didn't you destroy them? The reply came without pause. Because then we would have become them. That line echoed louder than any weapon ever fired. Generations passed. Monuments were built not to battles, but to choices. Libraries across species carried records of the tribunals. Curriculums included the lost colony, not as a tale of human tragedy, but as a universal warning. The Varnock reformed, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. Shame was no longer hidden. It was taught. And so, the legend remained. Humanity, who had waited in silence for decades, spoke once, and changed everything. Not through fire. Not through conquest. But by refusing to let the dead be forgotten. The galaxy didn't fear Earth anymore. It respected it. Because while others ruled by force, only humanity had shown how terrifying principle could be when wielded with precision. And that memory never faded.